In this program, you will learn how to replace the packing in a Koomey electrically operated hydraulic pump. The pump we will be using for this demonstration is a Model 360 Series Triplex Pump. This pump is the type normally used for 3,000 psi or higher pressure systems. While our pumps and their component parts vary slightly from model to model, they are also similar in many ways. Thus, you'll find that many of the procedures you will be given in this program will be of benefit to you, even though the pump on your particular unit may not be of this series model. For the sake of convenience, and in order to make it easier to show each step of the repacking procedure as clearly as possible, we will be using an unmounted pump. These are the tools we will use for the job. A 10-inch flat punch, channel lock pliers, a light hammer, a spanner wrench, a ratchet with a 15/16 socket, new packing, and a can of lightweight oil. Before we begin, we would like to remind you that there are two very important steps to be taken before you repack a pump. First, be certain that the power to the pump motor has been turned off. You could be seriously injured if the pump motor should cut on automatically while you are repacking the pump. So, be sure you turn off the power before you begin the job. Second, you should close the fluid valve on the inlet side of the pump. This will prevent the hydraulic fluid from leaking out of the system after you break the pump down. Okay, now that we've turned off the power to the pump and closed the fluid valve to the pump, let's begin. The first step in repacking the pump is to remove the nuts holding the cylinder head in place. After the nuts are removed, the cylinder head is then taken off and set aside. Second, using the spanner wrench, you should loosen the stuffing box gland. The gland will later be moved to the other end of the shaft to allow more room to work. Next, you should disconnect the plunger from the crosshead stub. This is done by using the channel lock pliers to loosen the plunger. Be sure to grip the plunger only on the knurled portion of the shaft. After the plunger is freed, it can be removed and set aside. Next, you should reach inside the stuffing box and remove the stuffing box gland follower. It is also set aside. Now you are ready to remove the old packing. This is done by inserting a long punch through the port where you remove the cylinder head and gently hammering on the punch until the old packing comes out of the box. The last thing to come out of the box will be the stuffing box throat bushing. This should be picked up and set aside until later. Pick up the old packing and look to be sure that the stuffing box is clean. If the box is dirty, get a rag and clean it out before you begin to repack the pump. It's a good idea to soak the new packing in a light-grade motor oil for a few minutes. This will lubricate the packing and make it easier to put in the stuffing box. Okay, ready? Let's repack the pump. The first item back in is the stuffing box throat bushing. It should be inserted all the way into the box. Make sure it seats firmly. Next comes the packing material. These pumps require a special V-type packing which must be inserted correctly. Improper installation will result in excessive leaking, so be certain you install the packing correctly. The first ring into the box should be the ring that is flat on one side with an outward V on the other. The flat side is placed in the box first with the V pointing out. Each successive ring must be firmly inserted so that the rings interlock. Successive rings of packing should also be rotated so that the joints are staggered 90 or 180 degrees apart. The last ring into the box is the other flat-sided ring which has the V cut into the ring. The flat side of this ring goes out. After all the new packing rings have been inserted, the next step is to replace the stuffing box gland follower. Now you are ready to replace the plunger and reconnect it to the crosshead stub. Next, reinstall the stuffing box gland. You should first tighten it firmly and then loosen it as swelling occurs to compensate for the swelling. However, you should use caution not to tighten the packing too much. If the packing is too tight, it will burn up, causing damage to the plunger. Next, replace the cylinder head and reinstall the nuts. Take note to be sure that you have the correct side up. The cylinder head will be marked so that you know which side is the top side. Also, be sure the cylinder head gasket is in good condition. Now that you have completed the repacking procedure, you are ready to put the pump back in line. Open the fluid valve to the pump which you closed before you started the job. And don't forget to turn the power to the pump back on. When the pump comes on, monitor it carefully to make sure the packing is not too tight. If the pump makes a hammering sound, it may be necessary to reprime the pump. The pump can be reprimed by removing the pipe plug on the discharge side of the fluid end. After the pipe plug is removed, turn the pump on for a few seconds until fluid gushes out of the pump. Then turn the pump off and quickly replace the pipe plug. Now that you've seen the entire procedure, let's run through it again quickly to make sure you got everything. First, assemble the tools you will need for the job. Second, turn off the power to the pump and close the suction valve. Next, remove the nuts holding the cylinder head in place. Then, remove the cylinder head and set it aside. Using the spanner wrench, loosen the stuffing box gland. Next, use the channel lock pliers to loosen and disconnect the plunger from the crosshead stub. After the plunger is freed, it is removed and set aside. When the plunger has been removed, reach in the stuffing box and remove the stuffing box gland follower and set it aside. You remove the old packing by inserting a long punch from the fluid end of the box and gently tapping on the old packing until it comes out. The stuffing box throat bushing should be picked up and set aside. The old packing is picked up and a check is made to be sure that the stuffing box is clean. Before beginning the repack procedure, be sure to soak the new packing in a lightweight motor oil. This serves to lubricate the packing and make it easier to put in the stuffing box. The first item back in the stuffing box is the stuffing box throat bushing. It should be inserted the same way it came out and firmly seated in the box. Next comes the packing material. Take care to see that the rings are inserted correctly. Make certain that the V points toward the power end of the pump. Don't forget to stagger the joints so that they are 90 or 180 degrees apart. After the packing is inserted, reinstall the stuffing box gland follower. Next, reinstall the plunger and connect it to the crosshead stub. Reinstall the stuffing box gland. First, tighten it all the way down, then back off a little bit so that the packing will not be too tight and damage the plunger. Next, replace the cylinder head, taking care to be sure that you have the correct side up and being certain the cylinder head gasket is in good condition. When you have finished, reopen the fluid valve and turn the power to the pump back on. Monitor the pump for prime and to make sure the packing is not too tight. This concludes the program on the repacking of the Koomey electrically operated hydraulic pump. Additional information on the pump assembly and parts may be found in the Koomey General Catalog in the Component Parts Data section. One normal maintenance function is to periodically test each accumulator bottle to make certain that it has the required nitrogen precharge. On occasion, you may find that an accumulator has lost its precharge, indicating a faulty bladder in the bottle. When this occurs, it will be necessary for you to remove the bottle from the system and replace the bladder. This program is designed to acquaint you with the procedures necessary for the removal and replacement of the bladder in a Koomey separator type accumulator bottle. The bottles are the type normally used in our 3000 psi systems. The bottle we will be using for this demonstration is a cutaway model which has been specially designed in order to give you a better view of what happens inside the bottle. The tools required for the removal and replacement procedure are a spanner, 2 adjustable wrenches, a pipe wrench, a bladder pull rod, a valve core tool, and a charging and gauging assembly. Let's begin by discussing the proper procedure to follow in testing accumulator bottles. First, you must open the bleed valve on the accumulator bank and bleed off the fluid pressure that is in the bottles. Opening this valve allows the fluid charge in the accumulators to flow into the supply tank. After the pressure has been bled off, next remove the valve guards from the accumulator bottles so that you can attach the charging and gauging assembly. Check each bottle individually to make certain it has the proper precharge. For example, a 3000 psi system requires that all surface accumulators have a 1000 psi nitrogen precharge. The pilot accumulators should be precharged to 1500 psi. All stack-mounted accumulators should be precharged to 1000 psi plus 1/2 the water depth in feet where you are drilling. Let's say you were drilling in 600 feet of water. 600 divided by 2 equals 300. So your stack accumulators should be precharged with 1300 psi. 1000 psi normal precharge plus 300 psi for the 600 feet of water depth. As we noted earlier, check each accumulator for the proper precharge. If you find an accumulator with 0 psi, add some nitrogen to the bottle to see whether or not the bladder is bad. If the bladder is leaking, it will not hold pressure. The nitrogen will simply leak through the bladder, flow through the bottle, and then out the bleed valve. This will immediately tell you that the bladder is bad and will have to be changed. If you find a bottle that is low on precharge, check for leaks around the valve stem. Sometimes the valve cores develop leaks and allow the precharge to bleed off slowly. Should you find a leaking valve stem, be certain to bleed all nitrogen from the bottle before making any repairs. Once you determine that an accumulator bladder is leaking, you should remove the bottle from the system and replace the bladder. First, remove the pipe plug and use the pipe wrench to remove the bottle from the accumulator unit. Lay the bottle down in a suitable workspace and remove the valve guard, the valve nut, the valve core, the lock nut, and the ID plate from the top of the accumulator bottle. Next, you will have to remove the port assembly from the bottom of the accumulator bottle. First, use the spanner wrench to loosen the lock nut, then remove it and set it aside. Remove the spacer from the plug assembly. And the plug O-ring. Next, push the plug inside the accumulator bottle and remove the washer holding the anti-extrusion ring. Slip the anti-extrusion ring off of the plug assembly and remove both through the opening in the end of the bottle. The anti-extrusion ring is partially split so that it can be bent and pulled through the opening. Remove the defective bladder by pulling it through the opening for the plug assembly at the bottom of the bottle. Now you are ready to insert the new bladder. Attach the pull rod to the valve stem on the new bladder and insert it from the bottom of the bottle through the hole in the top. Gently pull the new bladder into the bottle. If you pour some cushion oil inside the bottle and rub some on the new bladder prior to insertion, it will be easier to pull the bladder into the bottle. When the valve clears the hole in the top of the tank, remove the pull rod and reinstall the ID plate and the valve nut. Next, insert the anti-extrusion ring
and the plug assembly through the opening in the bottom of the bottle. Slip the anti-extrusion ring around the plug assembly and pull the bottom part of the plug assembly through the bottle opening. Be sure that the anti-extrusion ring seats against the inside surface of the bottle around the opening. Now you replace the washer, the plug O-ring, and the spacer, making sure each seats firmly. Next, replace the lock nut and tighten it with the spanner wrench. Before you reinstall the bottle, it's a good idea to pre-charge it with the correct amount of nitrogen for your system. For example, a 3,000 psi system requires a 1,000 psi nitrogen pre-charge. Check to make sure the pressure holds, then remove the test gauge and replace the valve cap and guard. Reinstall the bottle on the accumulator unit and close the bleed valve that you opened earlier. One important note: if you pre-charge the accumulator bottle after you reinstall it, be sure that the bleed valve on the hydraulic control manifold is open while you are pre-charging. This will allow the bladder to expand as it is pre-charged. Also, if you damage the new bladder during installation, the nitrogen will flow through the bottle and out the bleed valve, indicating the bladder is leaking. This concludes the program on bladder replacement in a separator-type accumulator bottle. If you are still uncertain of the procedure, rewind the cassette and watch the demonstration again. Additional information on the parts and the procedures is provided in the Koomey General Catalog in the Component Parts Data section.